Zayara stood at the center of the grand hall, her eyes scanning the room with cold precision. She was a warrior princess from a powerful alien race, and she had ruled her world with an iron fist. Known for her strength, her beauty, and her unmatched intellect, Zayara had always been in control. The people of her empire feared and respected her, and most alien species did the same. But today, something felt different. Today, she was about to face a human. A species she had only heard of in whispers, a race she considered weak and insignificant. Kale, the human soldier, had just stepped into the room, his every move confident and deliberate. He was tall, muscular, and his eyes showed no fear. Zayara observed him carefully. She had heard rumors that humans were resilient, that they had survived countless wars and battles with far more advanced civilizations, but she never thought much of it. She believed the humans were primitive, like all the other lesser species she had dealt with in her long reign. They were just another form of life to conquer or destroy. She had never met one before, but she had read enough to know how easy it would be to assert her dominance over him. The tension in the room was thick as her elite guard flanked her, waiting for her orders. Zayara's fingers tightened around the hilt of her sword, its edge gleaming under the light. She had no time for games. This human needed to know his place. Without a word, she raised her hand, signaling for Cal to kneel before her. It was the customary gesture of submission on her world, a show of respect for her authority. Every alien, every creature, had obeyed this simple command without question. It was something Zayara had done countless times, and it always worked. Until now. Kale didn't kneel. He simply stood there, staring at her with an intense gaze. Zayara's brow furrowed. She repeated the command, her voice growing more forceful. "Kneel before me, human," she demanded. But still, Kale did not move. For a moment, the room fell into silence. The guards exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of what to do. Zayara's gaze hardened. She had never been defied like this, especially not by a human. She had expected this moment to be quick and painless, a reminder of her absolute power. But now she was faced with something unexpected. The human before her was different. Cal's eyes never left hers, and there was something in his expression that unsettled her. There was no fear, no hesitation. He stood tall, as if he were looking at an equal, not a superior. Zayara could feel her pulse quicken. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This human wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't bowing down to her power. He was challenging it. "Why won't you kneel?" Zayara's voice was cold, laced with authority, but there was a hint of curiosity creeping into her tone. Cal's lips curled into a slight smile. "I don't kneel to anyone," he said calmly. "Not to anyone, not even to you." Zayara's eyes widened slightly. She had expected defiance, perhaps some resistance, but this was something else entirely. She studied him more closely, her sharp mind working to understand what was happening. This human was different from anything she had encountered before. His confidence, his sheer disregard for her command, made her feel uneasy. She had never known what it was like to face someone who wasn't intimidated by her. This human was looking at her as if he didn't see a mighty princess, but just another being. Just another person to be dealt with. "How dare you speak to me like that?" Zayara's voice rose in anger. "You are nothing. You are just a human. You are beneath me." Cal's smile didn't falter. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. There was something about him, something in the way he carried himself, that struck Zayara as both odd and strangely compelling. He wasn't playing by her rules. He wasn't even trying to win her favor. He was simply standing there, unshaken. "Maybe you don't understand," Kale said, his voice steady. "But I don't kneel to anyone. Not even to gods. Not even to you. Your power doesn't scare me. It doesn't impress me. It doesn't mean anything to me." Zayara's eyes narrowed. "You think you are better than me?" "No," Kale replied, his voice almost too calm. "I think you're just like everyone else. You think you can control people with fear, with power. But I'm not afraid of that. I never have been. Zayara felt a strange wave of emotion wash over her, something she couldn't quite place. Anger, confusion, intrigue. She had never faced anything like this before. She had conquered worlds, commanded armies, and destroyed civilizations. And now a single human was standing before her, testing her, forcing her to question everything she thought she knew. "Why do you stand there, human?" Zayara asked, her voice more measured now, though her authority still held strong. "What do you think you can accomplish by defying me?" Kale took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not defying you. I'm just not bowing down to you. You want respect. You want power. You want fear." He paused. "Those things are earned, not demanded." The words hung in the air between them. Zayara's heart raced, but she kept her composure. This human, this seemingly insignificant creature, was challenging her in a way she had never been challenged before. It was unsettling, but at the same time, it was fascinating. She had never allowed anyone to question her. But now, here she was, unsure of what to do. Her power, her authority, everything she had built, was being questioned by a human. And in that moment, Zayara realized something she had never considered before. Perhaps this human wasn't the weak, insignificant creature she had assumed. Perhaps, just perhaps, he might be the one who could change everything. Zayara could feel the air around her change as she stood face to face with the human. His calm demeanor was like a wall she couldn't break through. She had encountered many beings from different galaxies, but none had ever dared to defy her so boldly. And yet, this human, this soldier, was completely unfazed by her authority. It made no sense to her. Her mind raced as she watched him. Cal's posture was relaxed, yet there was something in the way he carried himself that was powerful. He wasn't showing any fear, which, in her experience, was almost impossible. Fear was a natural reaction when facing someone like her, a ruler with unmatched power. But Cal didn't even flinch. He was the picture of composure. Zayara narrowed her eyes, trying to understand him. He stood there with the confidence of someone who knew something she didn't, and she hated not knowing. It made her feel vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced in years. This human was not the type of soldier she had expected. Most soldiers, when placed in such a position, would have knelt without a second thought, hoping to avoid punishment or death. But not Cal. "Who are you?" Zayara asked, her voice low and filled with suspicion. She didn't just mean his name. She wanted to know what made him different from the countless others she had conquered. Cal didn't hesitate. "I'm just a soldier doing his job," he said, his voice steady but with an underlying tone that suggested there was much more to him than just that. "But unlike you, I don't hide behind power and fear. I don't need to." Zayara's heart skipped a beat. Those words were like a challenge, as if he was mocking her, but in such a calm way that it only made her more intrigued. No one had ever spoken to her like this. She was used to seeing fear in the eyes of those who were weaker. She had grown used to the idea that power was everything, that it could control people. But here she was, facing a human who seemed to believe something entirely different. She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "You really think you can stand here and speak to me like that?" Zayara's voice was colder now, sharper, as if she were trying to pierce through his confidence with her words. Cal looked her straight in the eyes, unfazed. "I'm not afraid of you. I never will be. Your threats mean nothing to me. And your power, it's just a tool, not something to hide behind." Zayara's mind began to race as she processed his words. "A tool," she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. "You think I'm hiding behind power?" She had never seen it that way before. Power had always been her shield, her weapon, her way of controlling everything and everyone around her. It was the foundation of her rule. But Cal was suggesting that her power was just a crutch, a tool to hide her true self. Her anger flared for a moment, but then it quickly faded, replaced by a strange curiosity. "You're different," she said, more to herself than to him. I've never met anyone like you. Kale didn't smile, but his eyes softened for a brief moment. You've met people who bow before you, people who fear you, but that's not who I am. And it's not who I'll ever be. I'm a soldier, Zayara, and I fight because I believe in something greater than power. I believe in freedom. Zayara took a step back, almost as if his words had physically struck her. She had always thought that power was the ultimate goal, the only thing worth seeking. It was the path she had chosen, and it had made her the ruler of an entire empire. No one had ever questioned it, and yet, here stood a human who didn't just challenge her power, but questioned the very thing she had built her entire life upon. You believe in freedom? Zayara asked, her voice now tinged with something resembling confusion. She had heard the word before, but it always seemed like an illusion to her. Freedom meant weakness, meant a lack of control. To her, it was a chaotic and dangerous concept, something that could unravel everything she had worked for. She had conquered freedom in others, bending it to her will. But Kale was speaking as though freedom was something to be cherished, to be protected. Freedom is what makes us strong, Kale said, his voice unwavering. It's not about having control over others. It's about controlling yourself. The choices you make, the path you choose to walk. You say you have power, but all you've done is take away the freedom of others. Zayara felt a tightening in her chest. She had never seen things that way. She had spent so long focusing on control that she had never stopped to consider the cost of it. What if she was wrong? What if all the people she had conquered, all the worlds she had dominated, were not just signs of her power, but signs of her failure? She pushed the thought away, unwilling to let it take root in her mind. You're wrong, she said, though her voice wavered slightly. I rule because I must. It's the only way to ensure survival. Cal's eyes softened, as if he understood something she didn't want to admit. Survival without freedom isn't survival at all. It's just existence. Zayara's mind buzzed with the weight of his words. She had always believed that she was doing the right thing by ruling with an iron fist, but now, standing in front of this human, she began to wonder if she had been wrong all along. The power she clung to, the control she fought for, it had always been about keeping others in line. But Kale wasn't afraid. He didn't need her to control them. And in that moment, Zayara realized that Kale wasn't just a human soldier. He was something else. He was a symbol of everything she had overlooked, everything she had suppressed for so long. He was a symbol of freedom. Zayara's thoughts swirled as she tried to make sense of it all. But one thing was clear. This human was not like the others. And perhaps, just perhaps, he was the key to something far greater than she had ever imagined. Kale's unshaken resolve only seemed to confuse Zayara even more. His confidence wasn't just about words. It was in his presence, his actions, and the way he carried himself. Zayara had dealt with countless warriors, some brave, some cunning, but none had ever stood so firmly against her like this human. She had never encountered someone who refused to be intimidated by her. But what if there was more to him than what met the eye? As Zayara studied Cal, she began to notice things that weren't immediately obvious. His body language was relaxed, but there was something in his posture, an alertness, like a predator who was patiently waiting for the right moment. His eyes, though calm, were sharp, scanning every movement, every shift in the environment. Kale wasn't just playing the game of strength. He was calculating, evaluating. He wasn't reacting to her dominance. Instead, he was studying her, analyzing her like an equal. It was then that Zayara realized that this human wasn't just here to face her in the moment. He had been prepared for something like this. He had come with a purpose, with a plan. And this unnerved her more than she would admit. Zayara had always relied on her power to control situations, to bend others to her will. She had built her empire on the foundation of fear and strength, with no room for weakness. But here stood Kale, a man who radiated an inner strength that was completely foreign to her. He wasn't afraid of her. And that fact alone was a glaring weakness in her approach. What did it mean to have true power if it couldn't intimidate those it should. You still don't understand, do you? Kale spoke again, his voice calm, yet it carried the weight of experience. You can't control everything. You can't dominate every mind. Some things can't be forced into submission. Zayara felt a sudden chill. She wasn't used to hearing these words from her enemies, especially not from someone so ordinary. He wasn't a superpowered alien, nor was he from an elite race of warriors. He was just a human, standing against the greatest empire the galaxy had ever seen. And yet, in that moment, Zayara realized just how strong humans were in their own right, not because of their technology or their might, but because of something deeper. They had a resilience that made them unbreakable, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Zayara was left speechless. She couldn't fathom how one human could have such an impact. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she truly understood about the species she had underestimated. The humans, though technologically inferior in many ways, possessed something far more dangerous, a spirit that couldn't be crushed. They had an unyielding will to fight, to survive, and to stand for what they believed in. It wasn't just about power. It was about heart, about something intangible that Zayara had never known. Cal's unwavering stance spoke volumes. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a symbol of the human spirit, resilient, determined, and completely unconcerned with the forces that sought to control them. It was that resilience that made him dangerous, that made humanity dangerous. Zayara had always believed that power meant control, that survival meant dominance. But Kel was telling her something different. There is more to power than just physical strength, Kel continued. It's about perseverance. It's about getting back up, no matter how many times you're knocked down. It's about pushing through the impossible. Zayara couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. She had spent her entire life honing her strength, mastering her ability to control and manipulate. She had never considered that there might be another way to be strong, another way to survive. She had always assumed that fear was the greatest weapon, the thing that kept everyone in line. She had built her empire on it, ensuring that no one would ever rise against her. But Kel's words struck her like a blow. She had never been forced to see the power of the human will, the relentless drive to survive. No matter how much power Zayara held, she couldn't shake the feeling that this human, with all his limitations, was more powerful than she could ever truly understand. Kel's resilience wasn't just in his ability to withstand her power. It was in his belief that no matter the odds, humanity could overcome anything. He wasn't fighting for power. He wasn't fighting for glory. He was fighting for freedom. He was fighting because he believed in something bigger than himself, something that would drive him to keep going even when every force in the universe seemed to be stacked against him. And this was where Zayara's mind was truly shaken, because in that moment, she realized something fundamental about the human race. They didn't need her to survive. They didn't need her power, her empire, or her control. They had something far more potent, a spirit that no empire could break, no weapon could destroy. Cal's calm expression betrayed nothing, but Zayara knew he had won. It wasn't about strength or superiority. It was about something far deeper, something that couldn't be measured or controlled. And it was this realization that left Zayara questioning everything she had known. For the first time in her life, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before: doubt. Cal's gaze remained fixed on hers, unwavering. He wasn't seeking victory, nor was he interested in dominating her. He was simply standing his ground, unshaken, in a way that made Zayara question everything she thought she understood about power. And in that moment, something inside her began to shift. Perhaps Cal was right. Perhaps there was a power far greater than the one she had relied on for so long, a power that couldn't be controlled, only respected. Cal's strength wasn't in his body, it was in his soul, and it was this strength that would lead humanity to a future far beyond anything Zayara had ever imagined. Zayara's mind raced with the realization that she had underestimated Cal. But as the silence between them stretched on, something else began to shift, something neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't just the battle of wills anymore. There was an underlying current that both were beginning to feel, though neither would admit it yet. A tension, not just of power, but of something more human, something deeply emotional. Cal's eyes never wavered from hers. Zayara, though a powerful and imposing figure, couldn't help but feel a subtle pull in her chest. It wasn't fear, nor was it an uncomfortable feeling of weakness. It was something more complicated, something unfamiliar to her: curiosity. She had spent her life surrounded by beings who either feared her or respected her, but never had anyone simply stood their ground with such quiet confidence. Cal wasn't a soldier to her. He was more of a mystery. "Why do you keep fighting?" Zayara finally asked, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. "What do you hope to prove?" Cal's lips curled into a slight, knowing smile. It wasn't arrogant. It was soft, almost playful. "I don't need to prove anything to you. I'm fighting for my people. For my world." Zayara tilted her head, studying him carefully. His words weren't the usual rhetoric she heard from warriors. There was a sincerity in them that she wasn't prepared for. But more than that, there was a quiet fire that she saw in his eyes, something that spoke of strength beyond what she had witnessed before. "You're brave," she murmured, before she could stop herself. "For a human." Cal's smile widened, but there was no hint of arrogance in his expression. Bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about standing up even when you are afraid. And I'm afraid of losing everything I know. I'm afraid of losing what makes me human. Zayara's heart skipped a beat at his words. The admission, so raw and so unguarded, stirred something inside her. She was used to seeing strength as power, as dominance, but Cal's strength wasn't in his muscles or his weapons. It was in his emotions, his vulnerability. It was in his ability to care, to love, and to fight for something greater than himself. Their eyes locked again, and for a brief moment, Zayara felt a flicker of something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Connection. She quickly shook it off, dismissing the thought. She couldn't afford distractions. Not now. "I'm not the enemy you think I am," Cal said quietly, his voice softer now. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to stop the destruction you're causing." Zayara felt a sharp pang of something, a flicker of doubt that she had long suppressed. Was she truly the villain in this story? She had always seen herself as the protector of her people, a leader who fought for the survival of her kind. But hearing Cal's words, his quiet conviction, made her question the validity of that belief. "What are you saying?" Zayara asked, though her voice held no real challenge, just curiosity. Cal took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. The tension between them was thick, but there was no aggression in his movements. He wasn't trying to overpower her, and he certainly wasn't trying to control her. Instead, there was something strangely vulnerable in his actions. It was as if he wanted to understand her, to see the side of her that no one else had seen. "I'm saying," Cal said, his voice barely a whisper now, "that we're not so different. You and I." Zayara felt her breath catch in her throat, the unexpectedness of his words hitting her harder than she expected. She wanted to dismiss him, to say that he was wrong, but for the first time, she couldn't find the words. "What do you mean?" Zayara asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Cal reached out, his fingers brushing against the edge of her armored gauntlet. It was a small gesture, but to Zayara, it felt like an explosion of emotion. His touch was warm, grounding, and for the briefest second, she felt a spark of something she had long denied. Something that had nothing to do with power or war. Something softer, something human. "I mean," Cal continued, his eyes not leaving hers, "that we both fight for the same thing. We fight for the ones we love. We fight to protect what matters most. The difference is, I haven't forgotten what it means to love, to care, to be vulnerable." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Zayara's heart skipped a beat, her mind trying to process everything she had just heard. Love, vulnerability. These were foreign concepts to her. things she had pushed aside in her pursuit of power. But as she looked into Cal's eyes, she couldn't help but feel the weight of his sincerity. For the first time in her life, she questioned her own beliefs. Zayara pulled back slightly, almost involuntarily, her hand moving away from his touch. She couldn't let herself feel this. She couldn't let herself be distracted by these emotions. She had a war to win, a galaxy to control. But Cal was relentless. His eyes softened, a gentle understanding in his gaze. "You don't have to do this alone, Zayara. We can fight together. There's more to life than conquering, more to power than just domination. There's love. There's peace. There's something worth fighting for that's bigger than all of this." Zayara's heart fluttered at his words. She took a step back, unsure of how to respond, her mind swirling with confusion. She had always believed that strength came from control, from dominance. But Cal's quiet strength, his honesty, his vulnerability, had shaken her to her core. For a brief, fleeting moment, Zayara imagined a different world, one where she didn't have to be a conqueror, where love and trust were the true powers that shaped the universe. But as quickly as the thought came, she pushed it away, focusing on the battle ahead. Yet, deep down, Zayara knew something had changed. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but she could feel it in the air between them. There was something more here than just a fight for survival. There was something else growing, something that neither of them had expected. And though she would never admit it, she was beginning to fear what that something might be. The tension in the air was thick as Zayara stood in front of Cal, both of them aware of the crossroads they were facing. The sounds of the ongoing battle outside their small shelter seemed distant, as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for the next move. Cal, standing with his usual calm but determined expression, had just made an offer that Zayara could never have imagined. He had offered her a chance to fight side by side, to join forces in a way that was so foreign to her it felt like a betrayal of everything she had ever known. Zayara's mind raced as she processed Cal's words. Could she really trust him? Could she truly form an alliance with someone who had been her enemy for so long? The logic of her upbringing told her it was foolish, even dangerous. But something in her heart, the part that Cal had somehow reached with his quiet words and vulnerable touch, whispered that perhaps this was the only way forward. Cal's voice broke the silence, as if sensing her hesitation. "Zayara, you don't have to decide right now. I know this is hard to believe, but think about it. We can end this war, save lives, both human and alien. We can rebuild what's been destroyed, but only if we stop fighting each other." Zayara's heart pounded in her chest. She had been trained all her life to be the leader of her people, to never show weakness, to never question the path that was laid before her. But standing here now, in this unexpected moment, she felt something stir inside her that she couldn't ignore. Cal wasn't just offering an alliance. He was offering her a new way of seeing the world, a world where peace and love were more powerful than war and control. But then, a voice in her mind warned her. This could be a trick. Cal could be trying to manipulate her. Could he be pretending to offer peace while secretly planning to betray her and her people? The possibility of betrayal seemed too great to ignore. How could she trust him? How could she trust anyone when her entire life had been shaped by the cold reality of war? "Why should I believe you?" Zayara finally asked, her voice sharp, though it trembled slightly. "You've been fighting against me for so long. What's changed now? Why would you want peace with someone like me?" Cal didn't flinch. His eyes held a steady gaze, his expression calm but filled with something deeper, something that Zayara could feel, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. "I'm not fighting for power, Zayara," Cal said quietly. "I'm fighting for survival, for my people. I'm not like the others. I don't believe in the destruction of entire civilizations. I believe in the possibility of peace, even if it seems impossible. And I believe in you." His words struck her like a physical blow. How could he say that? How could he believe in someone like her, someone who had led the charge against his people? It didn't make sense. And yet, as she looked into his eyes, she saw no hint of deception, no ulterior motive. There was only honesty, the kind of honesty that made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't comfortable with. Zayara took a step back, her thoughts swirling. The battlefield outside raged on, but for her, the battle now was within herself. The walls she had built up over the years, the walls of power, control, and fear, were beginning to crumble. She could feel it, and the thought both terrified and exhilarated her. "I don't know if I can trust you," Zayara admitted, her voice quieter now. "I don't know if I can trust anyone." Cal's eyes softened with understanding. "I know. Trust isn't something that can be given freely. It's something that has to be earned. But I'm willing to prove it to you, step by step. I'm not asking you to abandon your beliefs, Zayara. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that there's another way. A way where both our peoples can survive, not just fight for survival." Zayara's mind raced. The logical part of her, the part that had been trained to lead with strength, told her to reject Cal's offer, to refuse to be swayed by his words. But the part of her that was human, something she had almost forgotten, whispered that maybe, just maybe, Cal was right. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest, a weight that seemed unbearable. But then, just as Zayara was about to speak, the sound of distant explosions broke the silence. The battle outside had intensified, and the cries of war echoed through the walls of the shelter. Zayara's eyes flickered with concern, but Cal's voice brought her back to the moment. "Zayara, whatever happens next, we can't wait. If we're going to do this, we need to act now. The longer we wait, the more lives will be lost. Both of us know the cost of war. But there's a chance to stop it. Right here, right now." Zayara felt a deep sense of conflict within her. The survival of her people was at stake, and the idea of fighting alongside Cal, her enemy, seemed almost impossible to accept. But then she thought of the thousands of lives that had already been lost in this senseless war, the countless families torn apart, the homes destroyed. She thought of the possibility of ending it all, of saving lives, of having something more than just war and destruction. "I'm not promising anything," Zayara said finally, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "But I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to take the first step. Let's see where this path leads." Cal nodded, his eyes gleaming with a mix of hope and resolve. "That's all I'm asking for." As Zayara stepped closer to him, their fates seemed intertwined, and the path ahead remained uncertain. The decision to form an alliance, or to betray everything she had known, was one she had made, but the journey had only just begun. What would the future hold for them? For their people? Only time would tell. The air was thick with tension as the final battle began. Zayara stood at the front lines, her heart pounding in her chest. The battle she had once thought was impossible to stop was now in its final moments. The enemies, the very forces that had threatened to wipe out her people, were now in range. But this time, things were different. This time, she wasn't fighting alone. Cal stood beside her, his eyes filled with determination. Their alliance, forged in the fires of conflict and doubt, had now become the only hope for peace. The sound of war was deafening. Explosions echoed in the distance, and the ground beneath them trembled with each strike. But Zayara was no longer afraid. She had been through too much to let fear control her. Cal's presence beside her gave her strength, and together, they would face the unimaginable. She glanced over at him, his face calm but focused. His confidence was infectious, and for the first time in a long while, Zayara felt as though they might actually have a chance. "Stay close," Cal said, his voice steady even amidst the chaos. "We've trained for this. Trust me, and trust yourself." Zayara nodded, gripping her weapon tighter. She had fought countless battles before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about survival. It was about something greater. It was about their people, their future, and the possibility of ending the cycle of destruction that had defined their lives for far too long.